vampires in Iraq. So I stopped. What is this? Is this the fourth? How many of these have I done? I've done 3. So I think we can finish this in 2 more if I speed up. We are on page 13 of 41. 17 more, 27 more pages. So we need to do at least 13 pages, 14 pages on this hour, which means 1 every 4 minutes. The concept that success, so we just talked about the guy who died in Najaf. The concept that success in counterinsurgency consisted of separating the insurgents from popular support never took hold. Again, remember that there was a general who criticized them within the second year. So the military wisdom is clearly noticing the fault of the bureaucrats who were placed in charge of this. One of the main things that we should hold against George Bush on how he executed this war, that he put cronies in place instead of people who actually know how to execute a military campaign, and hasn't been held accountable for that. Detained all able-bodied males of combat age in areas known to be anti-American. 4th ID in the northern part of the Sunni Triangle. Have a map of Iraq with names and descriptions drawn by Nick. And isn't that interesting? We don't really see much of that, even now. Like, the narratives in the news don't give us geography, history lessons. They just keep us distracted from moment to moment without giving us overall context. This happens over and over. Supply convoys raced across the countryside, shooting at Iraqi civilians to keep them away. So we have convoys going across the countryside, and the civilians get too close, we just shoot at them. Commander's intent is military shorthand for general mission strategy given from above. The commander's intent. Mosul came with a ready-made civil war. 110,000 former Iraqi army, 20,000 Kurdish militiamen. Black special operations. These are just, some of these might be a part of me reclaiming the historic record to actually figure out what's going on. And part of these might be like parts that I think I can put into the story. The lieutenant mind state is similar to Petraeus. Race against time to win over the Iraqi people. The goals are make as many Iraqis as possible feel as they have a stake in the new government. Ask of any operation, will it produce more bad guys than it takes off the street? He did not believe in cordon and sweep operations. So Petraeus saw how you actually fight and win this type of campaign if it was an honest campaign from the beginning. Iraqis rumored that U.S. night vision goggles let them see through clothes of women. They also thought soldiers were cavorting with females. So these are the rumors that are pushing the civilian population away from us. The 4th ID was bad. These guys were just looking for a fight. They were cowboys. What they did was a crime, said the general. This is not my opinion, this is from what I read. The lieutenant colonel, battalion commander from the 4th ID. We would not win over the people of Tikrit. We're not going to win over the people of Tikrit. They generally hate us. We will not win them over by handing out lollipops. They respect power. Too many of my bloodied men bear witness to this. They are the beer hall crowd of Munich 1945. So this is I guess the 4th ID was characterized as a little bit too aggressive, and their lieutenant colonel battalion commander is likening the people in his area, the Tikrit, as a beer hall crowd of Munich 1945. They would round up all the military-age males indiscriminately, 16 to 60. Once blew up a guy's house he was building. just as a show of force. They wouldn't search families. Or, yeah, they wouldn't search families. Women would hand weapons from under dresses to males after a raid. They wouldn't search families. Women would hand weapons from under dress to males after a raid, and they'd shoot troops. So this is stuff that was observed, I guess. Paladin is a 155 millimeter self-propelled howitzer system. H&I, harassment and interdiction, meaning to stop the enemy from being able to operate freely. Kind of like stop and frisk would be like harassment and interdiction. They were there to kill the enemy, not win the hearts or minds. Have someone state that the U.S. is not a colonial power seeking to hold onto a restive province, but they were acting like one. Maybe a reporter. This is blatant ignorance of reality. So again, instead of analyzing reality for what it is, they come with the religion of patriotism. That, oh, but the U.S. isn't a colonial power. We're not an empire. Ignoring all the facts on the ground, which are showing that we're fitting right into how the British forces at the turn of the 20th century tried to govern Iraq, or how we govern other colonies that we have. I mean, what is the end game here? Are we trying to turn Iraq into Puerto Rico? Because Puerto Rico is a commonwealth. It's not like we allow Puerto Rico to just have its sovereignty. We're practicing economic imperialism there, if not mass indiscriminate rounding up of suspects, most of them innocent, converts them to militants. So the indiscriminate rounding up of suspects converts them to militants. This is my opinion. This is what happens when you execute campaigns like this. Describe a raid after the lieutenant leaves, where Nick doesn't have a firing pin. Enter home after dark, breaking down the door, waking up the residents roughly, yelling, forcing the whole family into one room under military guard while searching the rest of the home, and further breaking doors, cabinets, furniture. Arrested all adult males in the house, including the elderly, handicapped, sick people, tied their hands behind their back with flexi cuffs, pushed people around, kicked them and struck with rifles, took aim, led away in whatever they were wearing, pajamas or underwear, denied the opportunity to gather clothes or essentials, hooded and dragged off. That happened over and over. These stories were just about the raids and how they would happen. I guess I wanted to fictionalize one of them. Phrase, A Savage War of Peace, a book about the French Algiers. If you want to know what's happening in Iraq, let's look at other colonial powers and how they perform these so-called anti-insurgency campaigns within the colonies that were being restless. I lost my place. Hold on. Family members sometimes taken into captivity to force subjects to turn themselves in. We brought his wife and daughter, left him a note. We know where you are. We know what car you drive. If you want your family released, turn yourself in. It's an intelligence operation with detainees, not hostage taking. So we would take hostages for the targets we wanted, trying to intimidate them into turning themselves in. Mind state on frequent raids. If you ain't fishing, you ain't catching. Instead of us doing one house, instead of just doing one house, they do an entire street. Many of the arrests were done with a boot on the head, in front of his woman. You've created a blood debt when you do that. When you throw the man of a household down, who possibly is innocent, again, they don't do a house, they would do the whole street. And then you embarrass him in front of his family, you've created a blood debt in that culture. Many of the, some detainees in Abu Ghraib were held 90 days before the first interrogation. 90% had no intelligence value. So 9 out of 10 people that you're detaining for months at a time have no intelligence value, and then you release them. You're basically recruiting for your opposition. police, power, and political process. This is what will fix this place. That was a quote from someone. We are great at the tactical problems, the killing and the breaking. We are lousy at the strategic part. But are we lousy, or is this all because, again, whose responsibility is the strategic part? When I was in the military and I looked at George Bush's picture in the hallway, I didn't feel confident that this was my commander-in-chief. I've always followed character, and I was just like, you know what? Not really. That just doesn't make me feel good. And this is what, it's tough because what, do I want everyone in the military to get out of the military? No. That would be bad for our national security, but if no one questions our chain of command, then we're fucked. And you can't question it when you're in the military. And that's why us who are out of the military, this is our responsibility to have these discussions. Karbala incident. One of 2 cities in Iraq holy to Shiite Muslims. Lieutenant Colonel approaches heavily armed group to tell them that they are allowed 2 AK-47s out front, bodyguards, rules on the amount of weaponry permitted to be displayed in public. He's ambushed and killed. The lieutenant colonel was ambushed and killed? Ramadan offensive of 2003, 6 rocket attacks. 6 rockets attacked the Al Rashid Hotel inside the Green Zone, CPA lodging. Total offensive reminded Special Forces soldier of Mogadishu. Said the resistance was a sign of progress, which led an officer to comment, "Be careful, or you might become another sign of progress." Freedom Rest, Division Rest and Recreation Outpost in the Green Zone, former Officers Club, Swank Hotel with pool. Again, the difference between life in the Green Zone compared to life outside the Green Zone. To curb IED attack, soldiers ordered to shoot and kill anyone seen digging roadside holes at night in Baghdad. You kill every bad guy and there will be 2 more tomorrow, until you start focusing on the support, active or passive, in the resident population. Your actions are having 2nd and 3rd order effects that will kill your soldiers down the line. This is a Colonel Halshek to another colonel. So the colonels, again, are in charge of keeping their men alive. And so they see the illogic of all this, but they're being led astray by the bureaucrats appointed by George Bush Jr. 2 a.m. Your door bursts open. Infantry rush the private space of the house in society where honor is the highest value. Lay the man down, put plastic cuffs on. Then they say, "Oops, wrong house." The guy has no choice but to seek restitution. Plants a roadside bomb for $100. Take a shot at the troops for honor. When you make a mistake, you apologize. When they're on the raid in the end of Iraqi stories, pulls out a letter to ask the translator to read, "We are sorry for the intrusion. We are trying to help out here, and it is a difficult business, and we sometimes make mistakes. If you have information that would help us, we would be grateful." Sergeant tells him to hand him $100 worth of dinars. The sergeant in charge of the raid takes the cash, slaps the Iraqi across the face with it, makes him pick it up, and then kicks him in the ass. They laugh at him, and he looks at Nick. So I think that's a fictional account based on the little stories that I was getting. Is that, are they doing it in a tactful way? Are they not? Do they try, but then the person ignores their command anyways and still embarrasses the Iraqi? Do you see the different sides of the discussion that are going to come out when we have this type of talk? Is how to execute this type of campaign. I mean, so should we have gone into Iraq, and then once we're in Iraq, how can we actually execute on the campaign once we're there? U.S. troops assumed Iraqis were just bad shots, but a lot of shots were honor shots, where Iraqis felt honor-bound to response, but they didn't want to really kill U.S. troops. So as much as, the deaths are happening in Iraq, and as much as chaos is happening, if you believe in the good of human nature, it could be a lot more chaotic and violent if people weren't showing restraint, If they break into your house because instead of raiding one house on that block, they decided to raid every single house on the block as just harassment and interdiction or as a show of force, those people who are completely innocent but got raided and got thrown around in front of their family and maybe like some jewelry or some stuff got stolen from the house have to do something or else they're going to lose face value and lose respect. But then they know that it's suicide for them to attack the U.S. troops. So they shoot in the general direction. Taking sniper fire from high-rise buildings sent Civic Action Team to order an evacuation. That night had 2 AC-130s reduce it to rubble to demonstrate firepower. It's just something that happened. Tactics are means towards a strategic goal. Steps in the staircase. Commanders talk about losing soldiers while they talk about losing weapons. Robert Blackwell, former U.S. ambassador to India, also teaches at Harvard, brought in to revamp Iraqi policy in National Security Council. Look him up. Well, I mean, if I was going to, right now we're just reviewing. See, I'm getting into it, but I'm not writing this book. I'm just reviewing, remembering all these things that I had, feeling all these emotions I had about my personal life. That's why I didn't get into this, because I didn't have the time or space in my life to think that much about the Iraq War, but now I'm starting to remember all the bullshit and the real history. It's just amazing. So what's up with Robert Blackwell, the former U.S. ambassador to India, teaches at Harvard, brought in to revamp Iraq policy in the National Security Council. Every day, 800 trucks headed north from Kuwait to resupply the U.S. base in Iraq. The U.S. bases in Iraq. Soldiers from other units, when passing through other units' territory, were shooting at passing cars unprovoked, causing friction. So if soldiers from another unit was passing through a territory where they weren't holding that territory, they would act a little bit more wild. 2 major U.S. supply line routes, Tampa and Sioux. Marines called Army convoys on these routes, supplying mechanics and clerks. Manatees, after large, slow-moving, defenseless, herbivore mammals that get run over by speedboats in Florida. The drivers wore headphones, music, assistant drivers were asleep, hardly wore helmets or flak jackets, few crews served weapons, and hardly occupied, uncomfortable in the hot sun. Many were Indian or other third world countrymen, broke rules and carried weapons, shot at cars that were too close, changed to military units wearing riot face shields, and 2 sets of radios for the convoys and bases. 19% suffered from acute stress of PTS compared with 11% combat. So one of the most stressful things you could do in Iraq is drive a vehicle, especially in these supply lines. I don't think my cousin drove in the supply lines. I think he was just driving his command around the actual territories. Military intelligence officials think of interrogation as sergeant's work. So the MI officials call the interrogation as sergeant's work. Task Force 121, elite interagency team of 1,000 CIA paramilitary and Special Force Black Ops. Detainees showed signs of being beaten, severely burned, by being tied to hoods of vehicles like slain deer. They were devoted to finding Saddam and top allies. So this is probably driven by political means. If you could find Saddam, it's going to be a huge feather in the cap of the politicians. So the Task Force 121 was an elite interagency team of 1,000 CIA paramilitary and Special Force Black Ops. This is a discussion America has to have. Our secret government goes right to the CIA and how little oversight the civilians have over that agency. It was said in the news that the CIA, when Congress was trying to exercise its authority to oversee the CIA was spying on them. They gave him access to. There's this weird thing about the CIA spying on Congress recently that was in the news that went in and then just fell out. But yeah, this is interesting. Within this greater framework of the war and the invasion, then you have these paramilitary small groups which aren't accountable to anyone, breaking all sorts of laws, probably driven for a political motive. Fourth ID, sweeping up large number of civilians and dumping them in Abu Ghraib. 3 ways to put out an insurgency: make them desert, capture, and interrogate, or target and kill. December 14th, 2003. Sun year after Friday the 13th in December. Operation Red Dawn. 600 conventional and special forces capture Saddam on a farm village in Daur, 10 miles southeast of Tikrit, not far from the birthplace of Auja. Prayer rug over the dirt spot that looked recently swept. Removed slowly in case of booby trap. Under standard procedures, soldiers would have dropped a grenade or fired into the spider hole, but two hands appeared and Saddam surrendered. The Wicked Witch is dead. At one point, 500 insurgent fighters petitioned for amnesty. There was outrage at how their former leader was publicly humiliated. He wasn't handled with dignity. All Muslims were appalled. It was disgraceful to see the pictures of him like a gorilla, checking hair for lice. We are not fighting for Saddam. We are fighting for Islam, for honor in our country. How hard is it to, when the UFC had Conor McGregor fight Khabib, and Khabib beat him convincingly, and then afterwards he was talking shit to someone on Conor's team. He jumped the cage and went after that guy, and then he was held back by the Nevada police. And then he got back into the cage, and he was like, "Where's my belt? Where's my belt? I want my belt." And Dana White was like, the head of the UFC said, "If I give you this belt right now, in front of all these people, we're going to start a riot." So Dana White and the UFC can acknowledge that mob mentality. It's not that Dana's saying that Khabib didn't have a point, and at this point, right now, I think it's November 9th or 10th, they're still trying to see if, November 9th, they're waiting to, I think it's Marine Corps birthday tomorrow. They're waiting to see if, what the punishment will be for that riot that Khabib and Conor started. They both had to play in that. But at the moment, Dana White didn't give him the belt because he said, if I do that right now in this crowd of tens of thousands, we're going to have a lot. I think there's small fights that broke out, but he said that we're going to have a lot of riots break out. This is going to go full scale. It might get out of hand. We can't see that as a nation, that you captured Saddam, but maybe we shouldn't put his picture all over the place, picking through his hair for lice and making him look bad, because it's not even that people support Saddam, but we might offend people to the point of violence. Counterinsurgency text. Counterinsurgency warfare, theory and practice, written by retired French Army Lieutenant Colonel David Galula, born in Tunisia, raised in Morocco, entered French Army 1938, wrote the book at Harvard University in 1963. One of the tenets, unity of command with overseer as a civilian, because objectives must be political, secure the borders. So we have the wisdom and the knowledge base to execute on a counterinsurgency campaign. We're not following our own advice. We're not following the body of knowledge, which shows you that if they wanted to do it, they would have done it. This is either, at this point when I was reading and studying this, I just had to shake my head and think this is either criminal negligence or it's willful ignorance, and both should be punishable by law. When the president and the people he appoints are this ignorant, it's criminal, because we have the commanders and their body of knowledge they rely on tell you what to do, and we're doing the exact opposite. So we're either doing the opposite on purpose, in which case we're putting our troops in harm's way needlessly, and we're creating a lot of destruction in Iraq needlessly, or it's or if it's not on purpose, then these guys are so inept that they should be held accountable just for incompetence. The lieutenant has read the above book, is constantly reading it, so he's going to have that book, Counterinsurgency Warfare, Theory and Practice. Also, the USMC's Small Wars Manual. Nick gives these to Fran when he tries to recruit him to his cause and ask his help in progressive politics. I guess, so the narrative was going to be that Nick gets out, and now Fran, which was going to help me, I guess, process what was going on in my family at the time, living with my folks, and their insurance agency. So Fran was a civilian. It was going to be a guy, and he was going to be the embodiment of my love for this girl who was addicted to heroin, and the conflict going on in my family and their small business. And then Nick gets out of the war after all this stuff that he experienced, and then they get together somehow. And then Nick was going to provide that military wisdom on counterinsurgency and small wars to France, so they can, I guess that's where I was going to reconcile that, and then they were going to get into politics to actually affect change and go after the politicians. 4 rules for insurrection. Civilians in power, civilian and military cooperation, action firm and timely. When force required, it should be used minimally. Make the case for this being how we should fight the war on terror, and the fact that we are doing the opposite shows how we are fostering enemies on purpose. So now that I'm kind of like in my mind, I'm coming to that conclusion. This is stuff that I kind of feel in the back of my mind, but I forget how I got to here. And now this is sort of explaining my foundational beliefs on how I look at the whole war on terror in general. That's why when I look at the news, I guess I have a different opinion than the average person, because the average person hasn't put this much time or emotional investment in these concepts. Every soldier in Iraq has one memory, one moment that stands out in their mind. Lieutenant Colonel stops by Buffalo on his way home from the tour of duty to deliver a case of Molson's beers to the father of a soldier killed. It was payment for a Super Bowl bet he lost. So those stories are everywhere, I'm sure. Detainee reported as having a broken jaw, reported that he fell, but falling injures your face, your nose, cuts. Jaw breaks are caused by blows. Prison abuses. Detainees thrown to the floor, kneed in the neck and back. Bullhorn yells in Arabic. Loud, heavy metal. They piss themselves. Sandbags placed on their heads with IED written on them. Wrongly accused them of planting. When policemen abuse the suspect, diminishes the officer's humanity. When a soldier does it, the honor of the nation is being engaged. Often soldiers explain that the only thing Iraqis understand is force. And now you see how the narrative of cultural superiority comes into play. That if you don't have the time or ability to dig deep to actually construct this narrative, which is what I'm doing, I'm using my research to retain my humanity and trying to tie it into art, so that way I can spread that to other people to help cure us. Because otherwise, we start just explaining it through. At this point, before then, I believe that propaganda doesn't have to be hard lies, like obvious lies. Here, focus. Propaganda isn't necessarily the open lie, the blatant lie. It's just disconnecting cause and effect. And so if people can't really explain why the Iraq war is going to shit, and they can't explain why these people seem to be fighting us, but they're not being receptive to our best intentions, we're going over there to liberate you. You guys aren't grateful. Then they start coming up with their own excuses, which is the same that you see when white people hate black people hate white people. Ignorance breeds the racism, the ignorance of cause and effect. And so when people want division among our society, all they have to do is separate cause and effect. And then they leave us alone. And we'll come up with excuses ourselves to justify what's happening in front of us, because the human mind is a pattern recognition machine. And so we're looking for patterns constantly. So all we have to do is obscure the evidence which will lead to the right pattern, and then sit back. And then people will create the wrong patterns themselves while they spin their wheels trying to figure out something. We can't tolerate no pattern, and we can't tolerate no explanation. So that void is what actually scares us. So we'd rather racism than no explanation. We'd rather cultural superiority than no explanation. That it all just means nothing. So they're starting to say, I see the hints of that when they start to say, these guys are dogs. All they understand is force. The commander told the sergeant to take looters out and beat the fuck out of them. He didn't want to imprison them. The sergeant stripped them naked instead and set them loose at the base's front gates. I don't know if that's a real. Yeah, that's probably a real story. I don't think I would have. I wouldn't just invent stuff. So that's probably based off a real story. The first armored division had rules for looters: make eye contact, and they loot again. Hold up a second. But if they cry, they'll be deterred. Pulled a guy out of a truck, placed him on his knees, and shot the gun right above his head. Claimed that he was trying to scare away a feral dog. The soldier reported the incident to his sergeant and said he didn't want to work with this guy again. That guy treated all Iraqis like terrorists. So these are looters. This is like when you go, Hurricane Katrina happens and people are killing the looters. When you have abject poverty and you have people who are dying and starving and they're going in there not to steal a stereo but Pampers, but then you have other guys on a roof of a house shooting at them. So, but then are soldiers supposed to be the security police? Are they supposed to be like the de facto policemen for Iraq? Scene, nighttime. Prisoners with duct tape on their eyes, zip ties, hands behind the back, sitting in a truck for hours without water. By daylight, the whole town can see a truckload of prisoners. 2 men walking to work with breakfast in a basket are stopped at gunpoint. The baskets are thrown to the ground, ordered to shut the fuck up, intimidate Iraqis, install fear in them. If they got something to tell us, I'd rather they be scared. Stop police, ordered not to move until the last raid is completed. Bring in 16 positive ID'd men, along with 50 plus that were just relatives, neighbors, etc. By 8:30 a.m., they're done. PSYOPs blast AC/DC rock music throughout the neighborhood streets. It's good for morale, the commander says. Have this be the Nick story on the last raid. Only they take him aside halfway through, tell him where the firing pin is. Okay, so on the last raid, I was going to put Nick into this situation. They pick him up, they've shot him in the leg. He's zip tied, hands behind the back, sitting in the truck for hours without water. So yeah, I have this image in my head. And now it's daytime, and they're doing the last of the raids, and all the soldiers are out there doing all this shit and projecting their force. And one of their soldiers is tied up as an insurgent in that truck. So I was going to basically put my Nick character in the place of an insurgent in the back of the truck to help people identify with what we're doing to the Iraqis, to put us in their shoes. Only they take him aside halfway through. They feel bad about it now. They think that it's gone too far. They tell him where the pin is. After being shot, the sniper calls in the event. Dawn is breaking. They wrap Nick in a rag. He's naked in a rag. He is loaded onto the truck with the detainees. He sees it from their perspective. They have found Bob Dylan book on the girl in college, the book that Nick gave her. So that girl who's writing on the wall, the conversation back and forth with Nick and the lieutenant who died, and that girl. I'm writing songs at the time, getting into Bob Dylan more. So I guess Nick gave her a Bob Dylan book. So they play a Bob Dylan song instead of the usual metal. And the guy yells into the back of the truck, "This is for your friend Lily." And so that's how he knows they got the girl. They got the girl from the school. There's nothing left for him to live for. There's nothing. He's completely broken now. He passes out, driving through the neighborhoods as Iraqis start their day. They look at him, register this emotion, sitting in the back of the truck with a blindfolded detainees. His own eyes are open, seeing an emotion in the Iraqis that he had never seen until then, as if, now you are one of us. Now you are worthy of walking our sand. Now you are capable of understanding. Now you are broken under the cannibalism of power. And that was going to be, I guess, how I bring the Iraqi narrative to a conclusion. The full putting ourselves in the position of the Iraqis, which if you want to fight war, you want to understand your enemy and put yourself in their position. If you want to be a human being, you have to do the same thing. The only people who are free from these rules are the people who want to cut corners and just make money and be assholes. Is war moral? Is war not moral? There's an art to warfare. Bushido is the Zen Buddhism applied to Japanese warfare. The path of spirituality can include violence when violence is in the aim of protecting your moral interest. I would assume there's a point at which you have to defend yourself, you have to defend that which you love, your family, your friends, but they use that, our nation, they use that justified violence flippantly. We weren't justified in going to Iraq. They didn't pose any threat to us. And that's why when we execute that war, there are no morals there. And there is no higher ground for us to stand on. And so part of, I guess, what this artwork was supposed to be is to help us put ourselves in the position of the Iraqis and the torment that we put on them. That is the highest calling of art, is to, I think I said earlier, put yourself in the position of another, share that emotion. Someone who's doing this, I believe, in a very subtle way, is the guy who wrote that three billboards outside whatever Missouri. He wrote In Bruges, and then he wrote Seven Psychopaths, and now he wrote Three Billboards. Three Billboards is the third movie he made. He was a playwright. I think this guy has a long view of art and his place within the cultural context. And every single movie, the first two he referenced the Vietnam War and the Vietnamese. In the third, he references Iraq. He doesn't say Iraq. But the third movie revolves around a crime that was committed. We don't know who committed the crime. We have a pretty good idea that it was a soldier. They don't say where the soldier was stationed, but they say it was somewhere with a lot of sand. So this guy's walking right up to the cultural narrative, acknowledging what we speak and don't speak about, and then walking right back down. All they talked about in that movie was race. But I think personally that guy's way too smart for that. He put the race there just to give us some red meat to talk about. But what that movie really was hinged upon, and if you deconstruct it as an artist for the architecture of the art, it was about the soldier who committed the crime, which was the crime happened off camera, and the soldier, for the most part, and his reference to Iraq was all off camera, because I think the artist himself, the writer, doesn't feel like we're capable of discussing that, which is an honest assessment. But he adds just enough breadcrumbs for you to piece it together if you're looking for it. I might be reading too much into it, but Three Billboards, it's his third movie. Unless he's really obsessed with the Vietnamese, he adds these little, like the gross Americans in the first one, In Bruges, which are fat and can't walk up the steps. He's wondering how far he can take his American audience. From being a playwright to going into popular culture, and everyone recognizes his insane genius. Like, I'm not saying he's the best to do it, but this guy is talented at writing. Dialogue, plotting, character development, interesting scenarios, pacing. He knows what he's doing at the very least. And so there's a reason why he's including Americans, and there's a reason why in his inane dialogue it's including these references to the Vietnamese. In the first movie, In Bruges, just a little bit, but the character you identify with most says, fuck it, I'm going to be with the Vietnamese, has a high respect for them. This killer has a respect for the Vietnamese because they're the only ones to stand up against the American Empire. And then the second one, the Vietnamese have an even greater spotlight, where we actually have Christopher Walken Christopher Walken taking this guy who could have been violent, the Buddhist monk, and he could have gone and strapped explosives on himself and sought revenge for the genocide, which is what I consider Vietnam. And if you take that step back and look at that objective historic context of where America sits in all of history and how we're going to be viewed by posterity, these are genocides, and there's no way around it. Right now, I think we have enough distance from Vietnam to call that genocide. We're going to call Iraq a genocide as well. And so he looks at that and he says, so as the artist trying to heal and trying to stop the cycle of violence, he stops this Vietnamese monk from blowing himself up. And Christopher Walken, at the very end, someone who acted out in Christopher Walken was a character for retributive justice in that movie too, someone who got his daughter taken away from him. And he gives peace to that Buddhist and has him the last scene, pouring gasoline on himself and lighting himself on fire in a form of protest. Now we don't have to kill others. We just have to get the message out. We have to change people. We don't have to do self-immolation either. But that movie, Seven Psychopaths, was definitely a meditation discussion on violence, retributive justice, and why again do we use the Vietnamese as a vehicle in the plot. The first movie was just a little bit in our main character's dialogue, and it was brought up in the race relations, which I think that plus the Americans referenced just gives you a little bit of an idea of these breadcrumbs. The second one was a little bit more, and then the third movie, Three Billboards, our plot is driven by the actions of a soldier suffering probably PTSD, or he's a sociopath. But that's not really mentioned because he creates art that stand alone on its own, but I think there's some wisdom riding under the belly of the ram here. And I think that these movies didn't come out back then, of course, but I think that's the type of subtlety. Well, this isn't subtle. Mine was going to be a guy stationed in Iraq and everything happening, but to get people to start to be aware of their own biases, I think, is a noble aspiration for art. But if you do that too hard, it sounds preachy. So the art has to stand on its own and it has to be entertaining. But if it could also open up your heart, the art should entertain. But if it also opens up your heart, that's when it approaches art. If it's pure entertainment, I think it's not quite art. Yeah, so I guess now you're one of us. Now you're worthy of walking our sand. Now you're capable of understanding. Now you're broken under the cannibalism of power was going to be the emotional climax of the story. And that's the problem with writing and stuff. Not the problem, but like, that's enough. When I'm writing or when I'm trying to think of stories or trying to do something, sometimes that's enough. I'm like, it takes so much effort and time and space and technical skill, which I might not even have yet, to put that into a story. But you could get high and get those emotions. I get it right now. It's like I've watched the movie. Going back to these notes and then remembering all these scenes I was constructing and then plus all the personal emotions that I was feeling, I would like to bring it to the world to entertain everyone else and educate everyone else. But it's almost like I've already watched the movie. And I have a lot of other shit to do in my life. So you have these things and then you just shelve them. It's like I'd rather live the movie than write it sometimes. But this would be a good story to get out. Troop is cavalry branch's equivalent of company. Incident: soldiers burst into the house. Man shot a man named Ayub in the hand with non-lethal pellets. Arrested him. They seized 2 compact discs with Saddam's face on them. They didn't realize that Arabic writing said the crimes of Saddam, the exact opposite of the guy you want. Captain intercepted telephone call and realized shit. They got the wrong Ayub. Yes, soldiers were fired up, but if people were trying to kill you, you'd be fired up too. That's what you got. It's really hard to judge from your couch. So I don't blame the soldiers. I blame the commanders who put them in this position. I don't even blame the commanders. We have civilian oversight of the military for the reason. The civilians who put him there and the civilians who failed them in the execution of the mission should be held accountable. Checkpoint soldiers allegedly stole thousands of dollars from Iraqis, but they weren't prosecuted because victims could not be found. Soldiers talk about good areas for checkpoint scams. One soldier testified that robberies occurred at every TCP, traffic control point, he participated in. One captain called his baseball bat his Iraqi beater, ordered detainees to dig holes that would be their graves, kicked tied detainees in the back and ribs. Did you have anything to do with this? Roadside bombs. Pulled pistols on fellow soldiers who didn't intimidate Iraqis. Captain pulling pistols on... See, I said that all Iraqis were crooks and thieves. So I think the culture is set from the top down, just like in the corporation. So how much responsibility the individual soldiers have for this toxic culture but pulling pistols on your fellow soldiers should be a red line. Iraqi interrogators, members of Scorpions, group of Iraqis recruited before the war to carry out small-scale subversions, then employed afterwards to help interpretation and interrogation. Placed Abed Hamed Mawhosh in a sleeping bag, sat on him, rolled him around on the floor, bringing up memories of sleeping bag of horrors that Nick would play on Fran, their childhood memories. He was a bully. Hard for Fran to sympathize now. Fran now takes care of him. So Nick is 100% disabled, psychological discharge, and apparently Fran is related to him and he has to take care of him. But Nick was the bigger family member, the bully. I guess he's a brother. I think it's not even cousins in this story. He's a brother. Interrogations turn into a melee and the room collapses. Technique of wrapping tongue with rag and rubber band. Oh, I should talk about the sleeping bag of horrors is a reference to something we did as a kid. If that was in our group of feral kids running around this apartment complex, the Oasis, back in like 5th, 6th, 7th grade, we would all the kids I made friends with, but we'd all pick on each other, beat on each other, and establish this hierarchy, pack hierarchy. If you did something dishonorable, like you lied or you cheated on like a board game or a video game, or like if we're playing Truth or Dare, which is huge back then, Dare, they're gonna eventually things escalated to the sleeping bag of horrors. Eventually, someone dares you to do something that you don't have the guts to do, and if you back out on Truth or Dare, you're gonna get the sleeping bag of horrors. Not then, but eventually. The next sleepover, the next something where we have a group of us together, 3 or 4 boys, they're gonna be like, remember that time so and so? Yeah, sleeping bag of horrors. So that was our punishment. We zip someone up in a military sleeping bag, and we beat their ass. We stomp him. No one got any broken bones. But it was a reason why it was the most terrifying thing we did. A lot of boys have these games that they play. I just talked to my friend who would do that. Just when I was glancing through this the other day, when I was going to put this online, I texted him and I was like, dude, do you remember the sleeping bag of horrors? And it's interesting. You forget all these little things, these formative things. And I'm not advocating it, but it's stuff that we did. So I get it. And I mean, you don't think that these military guys also didn't have roughneck childhoods where they would do that or worse. So it's like all of our experiences are different, and when we come together to talk about what's right about human behavior and what's moral, we have to recognize that we're all coming from different places, and what is moral and what is normal human behavior. So I'm going to put that sleeping bag of horrors. I was going to put that into the story as a part of the background. A technique of wrapping a tug with a rag and a rubber band. It swells in the mouth like a giant Tampax, makes them painfully thirsty. Mawhosh was general in charge of Iraqi air defense, now part of Al-Quds division, organization supplying insurgency with mortars, RPGs, small arms. Went to operating base Tiger in Qaim, seeking release of son from custody. Died from smothering and chest compression. Had numerous bruises on arms, chest, leg, head, 5 ribs fractured. Had facial suffusion, blood congested in face. Have a soldier use this term. On a side note, Bush and his doctrine purpose is to rob us of our humanity. Okay, so I'm noticing this is a side note. As a human being with George Bush as our president, reading all this, trying to create these stories to reclaim our humanity, I'm noticing that because Bush wasn't as crude as Trump, but all of these actions culturally were from the top down. Oh, go in there and, like Trump said, cops should smash a perp's head on the cop car when he's cuffing him. Don't be nice to them. Bush had that same animalistic, like, bro mentality. Like, I talk about, like, masculinity in the sense of, like, drink, fight, fuck, but, like, there's a morality to it. You don't pick on the weak, the defenseless. You could have masculinity while having character and having morality. This is fake masculinity. This is toxic masculinity. That animalistic. This is a guy, like, you can have the romantic guy who hits on everyone but doesn't make anyone feel uncomfortable. And when he gets a no, he moves on. And people like he's a player, but like he's a smooth player. And then you can have the guy who's a creep. You could have the guy who likes to fight and he's aggressive, but he doesn't pick on the weak. He just, if there's a fight going down, he's the first one in, but he's not a sociopath. Um, I'm going on a tangent. On a side note, Bush and his doctrine purpose is to rob us of our humanity, turn us back into animals. Like the Iraqi population, they also want Americans to be in a civil war-like state, disorganized so they can pillage our treasury. They want infighting, loss of human rights, chaos in which they can rule. The natural state of man is compassion and reason, which they must constantly undermine. So even 10 years ago, this is what I inherently believe, and this is where I'm putting it down. In the face of this Iraq war, which I see so much injustice, in the face of embezzlement in my family's business, and I'm still not able to earn or have like a normal loving relationship with another woman. These seem to be all very important themes in my life at this time. I am stating what I believe. The natural state of man is compassion and reason, which they must constantly undermine. That is the algorithm I seem to be living through life. I don't know where I got those ideals from, the Christian upbringing, from my parents who, at the end of the day, do the right thing, even if it takes them a minute together. You know, at the end of the day, my dad does come back to my mom and he's been through a lot of shit, and the more you learn about your parents, the more you realize that their character is a struggle just like anyone else's character. No one teaches you how to be a parent, especially when my dad's dad died when I was just a baby, and my mom was an orphan, and my grandmother on my dad's side was very removed from the family. So they didn't really have much guidance. So when you cut your parents a little slack, especially I'm 36 now, and I don't know if I'd be able to raise a family. So I get that they worked with what they could. That's also why I'm honest with them, because I believe it's the best way for me to give back, is to help them continue to improve themselves, because they've helped me to be so moral myself in our honest discussions. The greatest thing they gave me was the ability to have these honest discussions. We might not always agree, but they don't really cut me off. Since I was a child, we've always been able to talk about things, so nothing's off limit. And where did I get my sense of morality and what I believe in? Well, we're finding roots of it here, or this isn't where it was. I think it's like 6 to 10 is when you develop your sense of morality, but this is evidence of it in my early 20s, that I'm facing a world which doesn't make much sense, and I'm not falling for the animalistic bullshit and the toxic morality, which I have young friends who do right now. Like 22-year-old dude who stayed with me at my place when I was doing Airbnb, and he's talking about shithole countries, this and that, and I'm like, you better keep your mouth quiet in New York, man, because you're not going to get laid with that bullshit. And so I was trying to approach him from like the concept. I know what he likes, and I know that he just got to the city and he wants to get his dick wet or whatever. But so I'm trying to be like, you know what? If you want to attract good into your life, you can't have that negative bullshit in your life. But all he sees life in is and he puts it on his Facebook and shit, is like there's the hunters and the hunted, and there's the weak and the strong. He's a gym bro. He's a dude with a motorcycle who crashed because he was speeding around. He has a bad relationship with his father. They got into a fist fight, called the cops. The cops said, we're not going to arrest your dad in his own house. You're fucking crazy. So like, he's sorting out his perspective of the world. And I'm not someone to raise him. I'm not even someone to tell him what is good or what is bad. I would just like to be another voice in his ear. And that's all I think you can be. That's what I've realized all I can be for my drug friends. And that's why I did heroin with that one girl. Is like, I already know that I can't change you and I can't change your trajectory. If you're dead set on that, that's what you're going to do. Some people, you can tell them about the electric fence, they have to see it for themselves, or they have to piss on it. A lot of my friends, because I'm stubborn, attract other stubborn people, and we all piss on electric fences. So many people told me not to go in the military. I had to go do it for myself to realize why I should or shouldn't be in. Now I have no regrets. So there's some people who are buying into this toxic masculinity of just kill or be killed. I didn't, though, and I think it served my life better for it. I think the fruits of my life, or the ease at which I make relationships, money, I'm able to execute because I put a word to it now, a phrasing, because it's hard for me to describe myself, and you don't want to reinvent the word wheel. So I started to gravitate towards Taoism and Eastern philosophy, and now I'm actually hanging my hat on Zen Buddhism because since it rejects all other traditions, I feel it's the least dogmatic out of any system of thought that you're going to subscribe to. And since it is a system of thought, I can talk about it and study it, and it's more approachable for other people because they don't have to. It's less ego. It's not Shaz and the way that Shaz looks at the world, but it's a separate body of knowledge over 900, 1,000 years. And in the 1200s in Japan was when they really accumulated a large systemic body of knowledge to formalize Zen Buddhism. Or you just go read Alan Watts. He did a pretty good job for the West. But yeah, these are other ways of looking at manhood and success and love and patterns in the world other than this toxic masculinity. We're going to have to do 2 days, but it's okay. We'll finish this up tomorrow. The natural state of man is compassion and reason, which they must constantly undermine. I don't respect George Bush Jr.'s character. I don't think that he understands what it means to be a man. They would routinely beat a prisoner until he passed out, collapsed, called fuck a PUC, pronounced puck, fuck a puck, prisoner under control. A cook came by, ordered prisoner to hold a pole, broke his leg with a metal mini Louisville Slugger, 3rd ACR, 101 Airborne, 4th ID. I've been hit in the head with a metal bat before. It doesn't feel good. Father of a 12-year-old boy killed and buried by U.S. forces was then made to dig up the body. Just an idea, maybe going too far, but have Nick dig up the firing pin, tell him that he better hurry, and he finds little 12-year-old girl buried alive in a burlap sack, beaten, naked, bloody, unconscious but breathing, the firing pin in her genitals, and then duct taped. He rips off the duct tape and she doesn't even flinch, passed out. The firing pin like a cold metal tampon. Describe blood, swelling, what little hair there is removed with tape. This ties the violence to the sexuality, the dark side of man. She is naked, he is naked. Describe her naked body, small and brown. Maybe a mole or birthmark on the lower stomach. Adam and Eve moment. She small and in the fetal position. Her bony spine curved like a rib. The end of innocence, punishment of innocence. Climax of tension. This is the person he was arguing with, the person he was trying to understand and win over, the person he thought he was fighting for. And then he is shot. The image strong enough that you would understand his trauma. I did not remember that scene, but is that too far? I don't know. I think it, I kind of, if I'm right about the guy who wrote 3 Billboards, I think it's clever, but I think it's a little bit cowardly. And I would probably do this approach more than that approach. I would rather be in your face and subtle. I wouldn't want to be crude with it, but if it serves the purpose of what you're trying to say, I think this would. I mean, I just read it and I got chills. That image would get across, especially if it was a girl that he was talking about on the wall and he gave the Bob Dylan book to, and now you've lost a lieutenant, and then you've lost. I think what I would do is I would simplify the story and I would stop the Fran thing because that was a reaction to what was going on in my personal life at the time. I would cut out the insurance agency, the embezzlement, the politics, and I would keep this just about Iraq. And this is how we would close it off. That's not something you could put in a movie though. That's something that would have to stick in the book. I don't know how you would film that, but that's some heavy shit. I guess that's as good a place as any to end for the day.